Hello and welcome to another episode of Overcoming Self-Doubt. I'm Linda Chung and this morning I'm joined by Helen Gillett. Good morning, Helen.
Good morning, Linda.
Lovely to see you.
You too.
So I'm very excited to be introducing you and this topic. So Helen Gillett, until very recently, Managing Director of Affinity for Business, award-winning company, down to Helen, who built and scaled it before sale, non-exec director of Orbit Housing Group, winner of too many leadership awards for me to mention, mental health champion, including recently winning the Not a Red Card award for Best Mental Health Initiative, and now very focused on helping businesses with social purpose behave like startups and scale-ups. What a list, Helen.
Thank you for reading out that highlights reel. That's kind of a nice way to start the call.
Such a high achiever. I have been saying that this series is about people that are absolutely perceived as high achievers, no matter how modest the individual might be themselves about it. Absolute high achiever, but very, very open and vocal about your own self-doubt.
Yeah, I think because I would have benefited from other people 20 years ago. If somebody had said, somebody I worked with, somebody I admired and respected, looked up to, whatever, had said, you know what, I don't know what I'm doing some of the time, or I worry that I don't know what I'm doing, or someone's going to find out I don't know what I'm doing, you know, and that would have, I feel, really helped me because I have suffered from self-doubt most of my life, I would say, and at times in a really debilitating way. And it took me a long time to work out that it didn't need to be like that.
What was that light bulb moment then? Because self-doubt is not something people feel comfortable sharing immediately. It is something once you have worked through it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the light bulb moment for me was probably a conversation I was having with my boss at the time. And yet again, I was kind of agonizing over not being sure about what the right thing to do was, and having this sense of being almost paralyzed by self-doubt. What he observed was how much I could see self-doubt as an asset, as something that had driven me to achieve. We weren't calling it self-doubt. I think we were calling it imposter syndrome, which is the sort of buzzword for it. Mm-hmm. And I was definitely in that moment of, maybe I don't deserve to be here. Maybe, I was setting up a new business. I was in an industry I didn't know anything about because I'd moved from telecoms and IT into the water industry. He had taken a risk on me, I felt. He always said to me it was a very low risk decision as far as he was concerned, but I felt like I'd had this risk taken, which was come and set this business up and we'll see how it goes. And so I was very much kind of looking around the industry at other CEOs of new water retailers, and they're all very impressive individuals. They've all got lots of, great experience in the industry. And there's me. I don't even know much about technology and IT and phones and stuff, even after 15, 16 years at BT and so on. I always felt like I was busking.
And do you appreciate the perspective? Sorry to interrupt you there, Helen.
No?
Because insofar as how you were looking at all those other individuals, that's most likely how they were looking at you. So in terms of appreciating that gap in thought.
And that is, I guess, my point is that throughout my career, I would look at those admirable people, often strongly charismatic leaders, the people who make you want to do stuff for them because you kind of go, yeah, great. And what you don't see is their doubt, their moments of uncertainty, their moments when they feel like they are, I call it corporate, it's like corporate agoraphobia or corporate vertigo. You're either too high up the ladder or there's too much space around you. You're not in a gang, and I think the point for me, particularly with that conversation with my boss, was that I was starting to get really paralyzed by it. Mm-hmm. And he helped me see that my way of working, which is to work really hard, not ridiculously long hours, I don't mean, but to put effort into knowing my stuff, trying really hard to understand as far as I can everything I possibly can about the problem at hand, let's say, and I don't just wing it. Help me see that was an asset, and that feeling like I was in a corner forced me to be creative quite often. forced me to problem solve, and also helping me see how much asking for help is a strength, because it brings other people in. It creates an inclusive environment. It creates an environment where people think, oh, wow, the boss is happy for my opinion to be heard. Maybe I have got an opinion that's valuable, and it starts to build other people's confidence. And why I would see that moment in time with that one-to-one that I had as a real changing point of inflection is that I came away from it not beating myself up about how do I get better at not having self-doubt, but thinking, I can use this.
Right.
This is, this is good. It wasn't giving myself a hard time about something that I perceived as a weakness.
So you started to embrace it instead.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say that then everything got easy. because self-doubt, it can be a wee small hours of the morning sort of nightmare. Mm-hmm. If it involves if you've got to take decisions about people's futures, if you've got a big presentation for your board or your biggest customer, and it's really important that it goes well. You can rationalize all you like that it won't be the end of the world if it doesn't go well. You know what? It's really important. And so there are those times when that really important sense can feel overwhelming. But I've learned how to manage it. And I've learned that at those times, if I really am not sleeping, then it's a sign I need to talk to somebody.
So that's one of the practical things you would do. You would find external opinions and talk through.
Yeah. And sometimes it's somebody who loves you. Sometimes it's important that it's somebody who will be really kind and gentle to you. Sometimes it can be someone that doesn't know you at all well, who'll just be incredibly objective and be able to say, bang, 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 these are the facts. And you go, oh, okay. So the little devil on my shoulder has been distorting those facts. I can now see this. Thank you very much. That's great. So it depends on the scenario. And I find with that as well that it helps if somebody can be really specific. The whole, oh, don't worry, you're great. That's lovely, but I can't do a lot with that because I probably don't believe it. Mm-hmm. I'm like, thank you very much, but I still feel not great. Whereas if somebody can say, right, okay, so here's the reason why you can believe. And they play you your highlights reel. They tell you, like you did at the top of the call, they tell you, this is why you can believe in yourself. And you kind of go, okay, yeah. And it's that having that fact-based specific feedback, which is what I try to give to other people actually as a result, because I suspect an awful lot of people are labouring under this sort of burden.
It's a specific of your leadership style actually, isn't it, Helen? You like to give specific feedback unrequested. People don't have to come and ask you for feedback. If you spot something that you think is great and you appreciate, you'll just say. Is that right?
Yeah, it's absolutely right. And I make no claim for unique perspective there. It's probably because, one, I know it works for me. Mm-hmm. Two, everything you read tells you that is the right thing to do. Everything you read about how engagement works, how motivation works, whether it's for school children, whether it's for adults in the workplace, whether it's for elite sports people, there's a weight of evidence that motivational feedback is incredibly powerful and important, and that developmental feedback, which is you did that wrong, you should do this differently, needs to be used really sparingly and in a timely way. So, for example, if you give specific positive feedback to somebody and then in the next breath say, now about that thing you did that wasn't right, you've wasted your time on the positive. We are not wired to hold on to both thoughts. We will go to the negative every time. And so I kind of got to the point where I thought, I've read this a million times. I believe the science. I'm going to start doing it. Why wouldn't I? And what I saw at Affinity for Business in particular was the power of an unsolicited, unexpected, positive moment. And I listened a lot to feedback there, and not everybody likes a big woohoo shout out in front of everyone else. So actually what I got into was writing little notes to people And I would ask other colleagues to let me know when good stuff happened, because there's no way I could hear or see all of it. So it might well have been one of the team managers would say to me, oh, so-and-so, who they keep a really low profile, they're quite a quiet person, but by the way, they've been helping me tremendously with this. A note from me saying thank you for that, and to know that their own manager had flagged it and that I'd taken the time was immense. And that, I think, is something that wherever I go next, whatever I do, that's the sort of thing I'll be doing more of.
That's such a lovely practical explanation of what can be done, because one of my questions as you first started talking about that, how can you do it in a large organization? How could you know what's going on with the whole of your organization when you've got hundreds of employees? And so that, to embed it in your culture so that your direct managers would know to tell you.
And one of the things I said was, I don't want to hear about the same people over and over again. I do not want your favourites. We all have favourites. It's impossible. It's human nature. Of the people that we work with, there will be people we connect with better than others. And that's completely fine. But don't keep telling me about how fantastic Jane is week in, week out, when you've got 11 other people who work for you. And actually, if you cannot think of a single thing to say thank you to somebody about, that you've got to think about your next one-to-one conversation with that person. If they are not performing anything that is noteworthy of thanks, then you've got to think, are you managing them effectively enough? Are you giving them enough opportunity to do what they're brilliant at? Are they happy? Is something badly going wrong for them? Don't just let people languish, never being thanked or praised, because that's incredibly demoralizing.
So taking that very specific element, because actually what you've done is take an element of self-doubt, say what helps you in terms of getting specific guidance, if you will, and turn that into specific positive feedback for people. That's an extrapolation of seeing self-doubt as an asset. What other techniques are you using in terms of seeing it from that perspective?
I have a bit of a culture, a bit of a mantra of feel the fear and do it anyway. And that doesn't mean I'm a fantastic risk taker. I'm actually quite risk averse. What I do is I think explicitly, what's the worst that can happen? This is actually a technique I learned from my dad. And because our fears in our minds, unspoken, are gremlins. They are that little devil on your shoulder. They are scary and they get distorted. And so if you articulate it and you say it out loud to somebody, or you write it down and you say the worst that's going to happen is this, I could lose that deal. Well, okay, so if you lose that deal, what? It's a kind of a version of the 5 whys. Mm-hmm. And you keep pushing until you get to the real nub of what is your fear. I'm going to look stupid, maybe. Or I'm not going to get that promotion, or the customer is going to walk away, whatever. And once you've articulated that fear, you can then say, well, how likely is it that's going to happen? I used to say at BT when I worked there, at least I know I'm not going to get the sack. Because it always was a very supportive environment, and an environment where, people generally were given opportunities. And I remember somebody saying to me, do you genuinely think you could get the sack? And I was like, well, it's one of the things I fear. I fear losing my job. And they were like, you're not going to lose your job. And I thought, yeah, probably not. Mm-hmm. And it is, so a technique that I use is articulate the fear, question the fear, bring it down to size. And then you can decide, okay, is that a risk worth taking? And if I don't do it, what will the outcome be? Because the trouble with never doing the thing that you fear is that you miss out on 100 other things, and it can make life very small. It's something that I've learned through kind of experiencing quite severe anxiety at times, is if I feel like I cannot leave the house, it's making my world pretty small. And is that what I want? So yeah, it ranges around a lot of different things, but I feel like that approach of feel the fear and do it anyway has stood me in good stead. And so far, I haven't got the sack.
It's interesting because the language is emotive, feel the fear, but actually your explanation of it is very practical, very logical and rational. Like, these are my fears, let's actually really capture these. And actually, when I look at them, I'm not actually so fearful of them. I know how I would deal with each one of those.
Yeah.
And so it's emotional language, and I guess self-doubt, of course, in itself is emotional too. But the rationalization of it that can be applied is what you're explaining. You know, how can I handle each step of this?
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things. It's why the positive feedback needs to be really specific, rather than just the kind of almost emotional feedback of, "Oh, you're great. Let me give you a hug and make you feel better." Mm-hmm. You need that emotion, you need that love, but you also need the specifics. And I think it probably for me is also rooted in a kind of sense I have of I'd rather take action than wallow in fear. And there's a saying, light a candle, don't curse the darkness. You know, I always feel like in a situation where there's a problem, yeah, we can sit here going, oh no, there's a problem, it's really difficult. Mm-hmm. Or you can go, right, what could we do? And it's all about, it's that positive language of what could you do?
Yes.
We can all list all the stuff we can't do.
Yeah.
And that's not very motivational. But once you get into the what could we do, what can we do? Oh, well, if we had Bob along, that would help, you know, and you start to think about other people and getting your crew together. And you know, it may well feel different for an introvert. I'm quite extroverted, but knowing I've got people I can reach out to and literally reach out, you know, and have that support, I know that sitting worrying about my troubles on my own isn't healthy for me.
Yes, and I was going to pick up on your language there of what I do well, and you use the language of show reel briefly earlier as well, in terms of how I captured you at the beginning. And I guess it is that thing, the language probably does tie to imposter syndrome more than self-doubt, of how we often forget all the things that we're really good at, how we often immediately focus on what our shortcomings are. And I would certainly say when I was a city girl, my first belief in terms of growing in a corporate was I had to be good at everything.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
And even if I hated it, even if I was completely unnatural at it, I was just going to have to learn how to do it. It wasn't even about facing fears. It was just it was mandatory that I got over it and got it learned. Yeah. Yeah. And what was interesting to me is actually the more senior I got, and definitely when I moved into entrepreneurship, was actually how it could often be much more about what is the one thing I'm really good at?
Yeah.
What is the one thing that is truly valued, that I can make the true impact with?
Yes.
And it's such a shift in mindset to get over yourself and think, I don't need to be good at everything.
Yeah. There's so much in that. Gosh, could talk for half an hour on that. There's a balance. So I think a couple of things. I think the tendency, and I think it's a bit of a Western tendency, but I think it's quite a more British thing maybe than an American, for example, is that we downplay success. Mm-hmm. And I think, and we tend to focus on what you know, 18 out of 20 in that maths test. What happened to those two questions? You know, and that's not particularly healthy, actually. It doesn't help learning. I think the attitude of there's all these things I could learn how to do and do well and perhaps therefore enjoy them more is a positive one, and that kind of growth mindset. But I certainly subscribe to the sense that everybody's brilliant at something. And if you can help people see what they're brilliant at and allow them to be comfortable doing that, comes back to that kind of maybe introvert, extrovert scale, is if you allow people to do what they're brilliant at, you tend to get teams that complement. You've got diversity. Everybody isn't all trying to do the same thing. You've got a diverse approach, and you've got people who are more comfortable in their own skin doing the things that they love. We tend to get better at the stuff that we're good at because it's enjoyable development, you know. Now, the caveat to that I would say, particularly as a general leader, if you like, so I'm a general leader rather than a functional leader. as a CEO, there's stuff I need to get better at. And there's stuff that I need to probably push myself outside of my comfort zone and make myself do better. I joked earlier on about busking my way through 20 years in IT and technology. I have had to get a lot better at technology as an enabler for the business than I was some years ago, because it was easy for me in BT to mentally delegate that to techies, because there were a lot of them.
Yes.
I can't avoid that as CEO of a business of 100 people, in the same way that despite not having any financial qualifications, I've needed to become much more financially literate than I would have needed as a budget holder in a large organisation, large corporate. So I have had to bend myself out of shape a few times, but reflecting on what you said about you get into these environments and you feel like you have to be brilliant at everything and prove yourself. Yeah, I recognise that. And if you're making your people think about their development in that way, you are not getting the best out of them.
Yeah. And it is that tie-in into leadership style for you. I know it's a strong focus point in terms of how you see this situation and think about how you lead from the front with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And because for me, actually, leadership it's both an overplayed skill and an undervalued skill. People laud leadership, they put people on a pedestal about their leadership skills, but they don't stop and think, well, what do you need to be a good leader? What are the habits, the attributes? And bringing it back to self-doubt, I personally think self-doubt is an incredibly strong attribute of a good leader, because it stops you thinking you have all the answers. It stops you being that person nobody can question. Because if you have some self-doubt and you kind of tend to look around you and go, okay, what do you think? What do you think? I'd like your perspective. You're creating an environment where people can contribute and where people can stick their hand up and say, I see a problem we need to sort out, rather than worrying that that's going to be shouted down. It keeps businesses safe, frankly. And when you look at some of the big business failures, how many of them had actually quite traditional, charismatic, strong leaders who didn't exhibit a whole bunch of self-doubt along the way? And guess what? When things were going wrong, their environment they'd created as a leader did not allow for the necessary questioning, the necessary challenge, and the necessary change. And I think also self-doubt allows you to be, it's a get out of jail card in a way, because it allows you to forgive yourself a little bit for some stuff. If you have no self-doubt, then what you're saying is, I am right every time.
The joy of being human, as we love that word, you and I, in terms of how important it is to recognise being human.
Yeah, absolutely. And saying, I made a mistake, I'm sorry, not we'd like to apologise for any inconvenience that may have been caused. It allows you to be a human being connecting with other human beings. It deconflicts, it makes for more positive conversations with customers, with suppliers. It just makes for a much more a warmer environment to work in, a more enjoyable environment to work in, I believe.
And in this unusual time, in terms of being human, how are you coping? How are you coping with lockdown? How are you coping? What are your key things keeping you positive and joyful every day, Helen?
Yeah, well, I've got a lot to be grateful for. Everybody around me is healthy, and we're really fortunate with that. And we have space for ourselves as a family and as individuals, so that's really lucky. And I make the most of that. We kind of make a point of doing that. So I'm doing a lot of running. I'm spending a lot of time outside, whether that's just even on phone calls. I'd rather be outside than in. I'm enjoying the time that I have with my kids, which is not to say we're not driving each other around the bend every now and again, but just the simple pleasures of being able to cook together. I love to cook normally, and it can be quite a solitary thing. I tend to be a little bit, I'm in from work, I put the radio on, you lot can all go away, I'm going to have some time making dinner, and then I can talk to you. Now we're doing it all together. So that's really lovely. I'm rationing news. I don't need to hear the news every single day. And that proved a healthy technique during the prolonged Brexit thing that hasn't got away yet.
Yes.
It's proving a reasonably healthy technique right now. And I think there's an element of recognizing that you can waste an awful lot of emotional energy on stuff you can't control. Or you can say, okay, put that over there. What can I control? And where do I want to put my emotional energy? And so those are sort of my top tips, really.
And it's such a brilliant way to wrap up. I know you and I could talk for hours, but
and we have.
And we have. But that closing sentence of that ability to control your situation, you can absolutely. And throughout the discussion today about self-doubt, it's what can I do? What can I practically do? And I think that gives us a great approach and mindset, real tangible things, techniques that people can use and all of us can use. And I guess coming back to your first point, that all of us should have self-doubt and can overcome it.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Helen. It's been
my pleasure.
Night.